Howdy, everybody. How's it going on this slightly cooler day? It was only 107 today. Wow, it's almost sweater weather. Anyway, Chess College, how you doing? Humanities 2. Have patience on the papers. I'm almost done with all the essays. I got about 20 more papers on total to do, and I'm impressed with what I'm seeing. So keep up the good work. I've got to do painters and playwrights. I'm getting there. Please keep up on your journals. You've seen I posted the sample out there a couple weeks ago or last week. That's what your journals should look like. It's 7 weeks of journals. You hand that in the last week, and it's essentially a diary of what we've been doing in this class. What you read, what you see, what documentaries you watch, what we talk about, what I lecture about, and how you feel about it. That's the reflection part. And that's important. Don't forget to leave that out. And if you don't think you need the 10 points and don't hand it in, you might think again because some of you haven't handed in all your essays. And so the 10 points is going to come in handy. Anyway, you have a last chance to make it real. Tonight, this week is all about literature and fiction. Today is about fiction writing. I'm going to do nonfiction in a day or two. It's a different sort of writing. Do you guys read any fiction books? Do you know what a novel is? You know what defines a novel? The word novel, a work of fiction. Um, someone says, have you read a novel lately? They're asking if you read a work of fiction. Now, other people will say, well, I don't like to read fiction because it's not true. Well, there's more truth in most fiction than there is in some nonfiction. Just because it's fiction does not mean it's not the truth. It's just the truth about who we are as humans told through a fictitious story, fictitious characters, usually based on experience of the author, what they observe in life. They're not just making the stuff up. They might be making the plot up, but they're not making the human condition up. That's already out there for them to observe. And that's the beauty of a fiction writer. They observe and they distill it down to the stories that make it engaging for us to read, make us want to read their books, whether they're detective fiction or romance novels or fantasy novels, sci-fi, horror. Do you read anything? Do you have your favorite author or do you not read? I'm not sure. You have to tell me what's your reading life like. I'm going to put that up in the discussion after I'm done here. So tell us what your reading life is like, if anything, and why or why not. Um, most of who we are as human beings on the planet Earth for the last 2,000 years or so is in the writing of fiction. From the Greek tragedies to Moby Dick, Don Quixote, to Stephen King, and the Harry Potter books. Yes, there's magic realism, but there's truth in all of that stuff. And that truth is holding up the mirror to who we are as humanity. And it's not that easy to do. One of the great writers of the 20th century once said, easy reading is damn hard writing. And he's right. Don't ever discount an easy read. It took a lot of craft. That's what my degree is in creative writing, my master's degree. I'm a novelist, I'm a playwright and a screenwriter. I try to sell this stuff, I try to get published. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I keep writing because it's an outlet for my creativity, and it's all you need. You don't need anything else. It might help to have a nice computer and a printer, but you don't need it. But you do need that. And a piece of paper, several hundred pieces of paper. Anyway, writing is fun, it's creative, it gets the juices flowing when you get depressed and you put your pen to paper and time flies, and you can make up a story, and you can play God. And that's what fiction writers do. They're playing God. They make up whole worlds. Without them, they don't exist. They make up characters without them that don't exist. They make them live, love, prosper, fail, die, murder. Without them, there is nothing. They are gods of fiction. They create their whole world universe. And that takes a lot of imagination, a lot of craft, and a lot of understanding the human condition. And you feel that you have something to say. Hopefully you do. If not, no one's going to read it. So, writers writing, why are they writing our stories? Well, because we have this need to read our stories. We have this need to watch the movies of our stories, to listen to the music of our stories, to watch the paintings of our stories. It's the human need in all of us to see what connects us to each other. How are we connected to people in Africa? How are we connected to people in South America? Unless we go there and live there for years and years and years, we aren't. But fiction, art, movies, music, dance, opera, paintings brings us together, and we see that we're not that much different. Yes, our language different, we might look differently, we might dress different, but we all want the same thing. We want to have a meaningful life. We want to put some meaning on what we're doing here in this overcrowded world we're living in. That's very hot right now. Um, Early novels, long, long time ago, Cervantes, a Spanish writer, wrote a classic book novel about an aging knight in shining armor when there were no more knights. And he goes out because he's probably senile, and he goes out to defeat the dragons and save people. There's no dragons, folks. That's just his imagination. To him, a dragon is a windmill. That's how they had power in those days. They didn't have any electricity. They had water power through windmills. And so they're in the countryside everywhere at one time. Um, and when he would see a windmill, he would attack it with a horse, an old skinny horse, and he would attack it like a knight. He's going to slay the dragon, and he's going to save the people. Because in his imagination, that's what he sees. And who's to deny what he sees? It's his reality, it's his truth. His friend who travels with him on a little donkey, Panjo, is um, the person that's trying to keep him grounded and fed and clothed, but he follows right along. And then after a while, he starts believing that the knight is doing good. The novel's called Don Quixote. Maybe you've heard of that. They've made movies of it. They've made musicals about it. It's a classic story, and it's one of the first what they call modern fiction. And it was read in its time, but in its time, this is long before the digital kingdom and printing presses. They were, and very few people knew how to read. It was only the highly, usually wealthy people who knew how to read. Most people did not have the ways and means to learn how to read. But those that did, and that book has been in circulation now for 500 years, if not more. Um, Considered the first Western novel, that's for sure. When I say Western, I'm talking about Western Hemisphere, European, not Asia. Um, that there's other books that were written there. Um, the Art of War is one of them. Um, so people are writing even before most of the population knew how to read. Why do you think that was? What is this desire to put out a creative endeavor to very few people? Well, because the person writing that book Didn't have a choice. They really don't. They have to get the story out any way they can. People like Dickens in England, who wrote so many classic novels that they've turned into many, many classic movies. Um, he wrote in the newspaper. He would present his chapters in the London Times. And they were so well read that they got published in the books, Bleak House, and um, so many more. They made musicals out of his music. I'm sorry, his books, his novels. Um, People are still studying to them to this day. Christmas Carol, Scrooge. Maybe you've seen the movies. He created all that. Classic stories of grim England as it's coming into the industrial age. And he wrote about the people who were living in that age, before electricity, before TV and internet, and how they lived. And you read those stories, and they're vivid descriptions about life in that time of the world, middle 19th century. He was so big in his time that he actually toured the United States giving readings. Charles Dickens. He had that many readers that people in the States read his stuff too. And so he's a very well known author, did very well in his lifetime. Somebody like person who wrote Moby Dick, who wrote it in the 19th century. Melville wrote a classic novel about a white whale and the man obsessed with killing it. And it's a great metaphor about fighting the impossible, fight against an impossible foe. Do we need to have somebody to fight? Maybe we do. The book was huge, bestseller, made into many movies. They've done so many things with that. Some have smaller books. Billy Budd, Set on the High Oceans. It's about a shipmate on a ship who's being punished as an example. They're going to hang him. He didn't do it. He's an example. He's chosen, and it's a heartbreaking story. That's what they used to do in those days, is they would make examples of people by executing them in the military. This happened in World War II, believe it or not, when the people who refused to fight in World War II, you could be executed for that, and sometimes they would actually do that. Our own people, our U.S. Army. So that's reality. So fiction deals with that kind of reality. But then some fiction, bestseller fiction, doesn't deal with reality at all, but it's still truthful. And you think, well, if it's not a true story, how can it be truthful? Who says a true story that's actually happened, that somebody writes about, is truthful? They could state the facts. There's more truth in fiction because you could expand, you could use your imagination. And so magic realism books like Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, there's no flying dragons, folks. Just thought I'd throw that out there. They're no less truthful about the human condition, about jealousies and people's relationships and our greed and people trying to do good and people trying to be bad. It's all the truth. And that's a beautiful thing about fiction. It creates this entire world Hopefully, it's engaging and makes you want to keep reading. Sci-fi, great sci-fi books like Dune are incredible reads. Adventure stories like maybe you've heard of Dune. They've made it into a movie a couple times. Arthur C. Clarke wrote great sci-fi books, I should say. His Some of his books, like 2001: Space Odyssey, was made into a movie. And if you read his sci-fi, it's wonderful, and it's not so far-fetched. Other sci-fi writers who were great, Philip K. Dick, he didn't like the word sci-fi. He liked speculative fiction. He never wrote about outer space and space guns. He wrote about things here on Earth. Um, like, for example, one of his famous books is The Man in the High Castle, about what if Nazis won the war. That's sort of speculative, and Hitler became our Lord ruler. That kind of fiction. Um, he did a great book called Counterclock World, where everything is backwards. It's normal. People age backwards. You start off dead. They have grave diggers who aren't digging graves, they're digging the dead up who are coming back to life. And they're out there in the cemeteries and they have to listen, and people are clawing at the caskets. They have to dig them up, and then they come to life, and they start aging backwards from death to birth. So they go, their life is exactly opposite. And so there's a lot of similarities. They go to school, they marry, they have children, but instead of aging, they get younger. And so you're a father at 30, but then all of a sudden you're a teenager. But the child you had at 30 is now going back. It's going to be older than you are now because everything is backwards. It's really complicated and really clever. And he did a lot of type of novels. And it's tragic because you can fall in love with someone who's going the opposite. You're going towards your birth canal and they're going towards the grave. Um, Fascinating, interesting perspective on what is aging. Anyway, so great speculative fiction out there. Margaret Atwood's another great writer. Her books have been made into movies. Maybe you've seen the series that was recently huge. Why am I going to forget the name of it? Anyway, it was on Netflix or something. I'll come up with it. Um, I'm going to have to look it up real quick while we're talking. Why can't I think of that book? Anyway, fiction writing is high art form, high truthful art form. I just got to take 1 second to do this. Here she is. It was just this huge. The Handmaid's Tale. It was a huge Netflix series this year. Last year, The Handmaid's Tale, about women and how the culture keeps them down and keeps them pregnant. They're only there to be baby makers. So it was a very early nightmarish story about feminism and the power that women did not have. Uh, and that's another speculative fiction. Is it truthful? Absolutely. Um, some of our greatest nonfiction writers I'm going to talk about that later on this week. Um, some of their books, like Truman Capote writing In Cold Blood or Norman Mailer writing Executioner's Song, they read like novels. They're writing Executioner's Song, they read like novels. They don't read like boring nonfiction or old history or Stephen Ambrose's great fiction books about World War II, Band of Brothers, or Lewis and Clark Expedition. They're wonderful reads, and they read as good as any fiction book, but they're nonfiction. They're just written like novels, which makes it more engaging, the reader. You know how when you're in grammar school and you had to read those old historical books about histories and how boring it all was? These guys turned that around and made it exciting. Anyway, fiction writers, I'm going to sign a paper tomorrow. Your next essay is going to be about literary writers. I'll give like this last, I'll probably put 3 or 4 writers up there. You make your choice. I don't know which ones yet. I won't assign it till tomorrow. You'll have a week to do it. And that'll be it. I'll talk to you more about literary and literature as we go along through this hot week. Stay cool out there. Keep your animals cool. Make sure everybody's got water and the fans are going and the air conditioner and nobody's suffering, because people could die easily, and your animals especially. And on that happy note, go out there and read a book and look at the discussion, which I'm going to post right now. What is your reading life like? And be truthful. See you next time.